The next day, John was there again with 2 of his disciples. When he saw Jesus passing by, he said, "Look, the Lamb of God." When the 2 disciples heard him say this, they followed Jesus. Turning around, Jesus saw them following and asked, "What do you want?" They said, "Rabbi, where are you staying?" "Come," he replied, "and you will see." So they went and saw where he was staying, and they spent that day with him. Over the past 2 to 3 years, I have found my head turned and my heart caught by the transformative glimpse of God I have experienced through Christian community. Like the 2 disciples, I have felt this glimpse feed a deeper curiosity, prompting me to follow and ultimately be invited to come and see. To this end, this 2023, I am embarking on a 6-month journey to dwell with various Christian communities. On the way, I'll be sharing interviews with community members, founders, and leaders to learn more about the blessings, challenges, and wisdom these dwelling places of God hold. In doing so, I hope to inform how it is we might nurture people and communities to be transformative manifestations of God, offering a glimpse of the divine and inviting people to come and see God's loving dwelling place.
I'm Sue Langdon. I'm the warden for the Pilsdon community. I'm an Anglican priest. My first vocation was as a nurse, and before I had my children, I was a medical ward sister, and then had time with the children while they were little. Then I was living in Guernsey in the Channel Islands, and somebody had felt that there needed to be a sort of advice centre in Guernsey. There wasn't anything, and I got involved with that. That would have been about 1978, I suppose, something like that, a really long time ago. It was all voluntary, and eventually I ended up leading that. And within about 5 years, Citizens Advice Bureau National in England allowed us to use their logo and everything else, even though all the information we had wasn't English based at all, because it's a different legislative base, different way of government in Guernsey. So I did that for about 5 years, and then they still used to have what was called the poor law in Guernsey in those days, and there would be 2 people from each parish who would minister that poor law, and they were called procurers of the poor. So in England there would have been the old poor law, a bit like that, and I did that for a couple of years, and then somebody suggested I ought to stand for election. So in 1985, I stood for election, and I was elected to what's called the States of Deliberation, which l'État de Libération in Guernsey. So I became a deputy for the parish of the Vale in Guernsey, and I was in politics for 13 years. And my final kind of few years, I was president of what was called the Board of Health, which is a bit like being Minister for Health, and I was the lead person for development control for the Planning Authority, and I was a part of the executive committee, which would be like a cabinet really. So I did that until 1998. And then I felt we'd taken a lot of change through the house, and we'd given there was private medicine, and things were difficult for lots of families, so we made a sort of health service. Did all sorts of other bits of legislation which changed lives, I think, we created a great team at Health. But I just felt, it was always a vocational thing. And then I just, we'd come to an end of a long piece of work that had been difficult to get through the house. And I just felt at the end of that debate that I wasn't meant to be there anymore. So that's what happened, really. I resigned my seat at the beginning of '98, and I'd been going backwards and forwards to London. I was doing a psychosynthesis counselling therapy course and lived with some sisters in London while I did that. And then I asked them, could I go and live with them, And my sons were living in London then. So I lived with them for not quite 2 years, and I'd always wanted to do a 30-day Ignatian retreat. And so in July, I think it was, 99, I went to St Bino's, and I met Jonathan Herbert at St Bino's, who was also doing his 30-day Ignatian retreat. And I'd been looking to join a community, but having a family and everything else, I felt it was important. I couldn't commit in the way that a religious might for life. I felt the family needed to. So, but I'd felt community was the call. And of course, I'd met Jonathan, and he started talking about Pilsdon, and I thought, oh, okay, maybe that's it. So I didn't even think about it on retreat, really. It all felt pretty settled, and we were there for nearly 5 weeks, I think. And I went back to London and then came here for a week and did what's called a trial week, like all the guests do when they come here. And the community interviewed me at the end, and within about a month, I think I was here. I joined up. And the understanding was that while I was here, I'd explore, the offer to ordination, and I'd been running away from it for years. But in the end, so I left here after 2 years and went to Oxford, went to Pilsdon and ordination training, and did a stipendiary curacy in Amesbury. And then at the end of that, the bishop, who really understood that I wasn't going to be a parish priest right from the beginning, fortunately for me, let me and a friend have a big old rectory. Well, it was a modern rectory, but it hadn't been used as a rectory for a while, the other side of Marshwood Vale here at Whitchurch. And we set off to offer retreats and things like that. And I was there for 10 years. It was sold. Came here for a bit and then found a home in Chiddock, which is where I go for my days off, with no thought of, although people had said, you'll be a warden of Pilsdon one day. By this time I was getting ancient. So, I was quite happy doing what I'd got a ministry to spiritual direction. I was teaching clergy. I was running spirituality groups and all sorts of very interesting things. I'm very content at that. And then Michael, who's the previous warden here, wanted to retire in 2019, and part of my practice is Lectio on the Gospel of the Day, and it was Mary's Sunday in Advent, and I'm sat there thinking, I'm reading, about Gabriel coming to Mary and all that, and a question was raised in me, and I thought, I wonder what Gabriel would say to me. And immediately it was Pilsdon, and I closed my Bible and threw it and said, don't be ridiculous. So So there you are. So and I thought, oh, this is just it's just nuts, because I was 70 then. Anyway, I didn't get any peace at all over Christmas. I didn't talk to anybody. I just didn't get any peace. And then I went to St Swithin's in Bridport, and an old mate of mine, Dan Shackle, was preaching. I can't remember the text now, but what he was saying was, it doesn't matter how old you are, if God has something for you to do, you'll do it. And it was kind of pinned me to the pew, you know. So I went to him at the peace. I said, you don't know what you've said. And he looked, he said, well, is it good or bad? I said, I don't know yet. So then I got hold of my former spiritual director, who was living in London then. She'd seen me through my ordination training. Went to see her. I said, I hope you're going to tell me I'm crazy. I told her what had happened. She said, I don't think you are. And then I spoke to my former bishop, who'd since moved on. And he said, well, there's no better place than Pilsdon to have a go. You know, that's what he said. So I talked to the family then, and they said, I said, think about it for a week. Because it's quite sacrificial, because you're here every Christmas and Easter and all of that. And so I talked to them after about a week, and they all said, it's fine, Mum. You know, however, when we're all together on holiday, you're going to have to let us do the cooking and everything, because you're going to need to have a rest, you know. So that was the condition, really. So so I put an application in. I mean, it was nuts. It was intellectual nonsense, really, at my age, to come and do this. It's just crackers. Anyway, so the trustees interviewed me a whole day. They had me a whole day. They were interviewing me. So here I am, and I came in September 2019, and I'll retire in October 24. By which time I shall be 76, which is potty.
Wow.
So that's it, really.
Wow. Well, I'll say that I've been incredibly touched by witnessing your leadership, genuinely. So that's been really beautiful to see. And I would never have guessed that you were 76.
Well, I'm not quite. Next year.
Even 75.
Yeah, so yeah. I know, well, there we are. But, you know, I mean, the thing was really, all the time I kept thinking, this is madness. It is madness. And I said I put in my application, look, it might be quite hard, because they knew me. They all knew me. So I said, it might be quite hard. I said, but you must put Pilsdon first. You must, you know, and I'll understand, you know, if you feel that my age is against me. I mean, legally they can't do that, I don't think, but I felt they needed to be given permission, really. And at interview I said, look, you know, if you've got any doubts at all, for Pilsdon's sake, you must say no to me, and that will be the right thing. And I genuinely meant it, and they knew I did, you know. But here I am, you know, and then of course the next thing, I'm here 6 months and we've got COVID, and here, you know, my nursing background and all of that, you know, with pandemic. One of the last things I did before I left Guernsey with the Director of Public Health, a lovely man, Australian, called David Jeffs, and he said to me, you know, there will be a pandemic, there needs to be a plan. And it was one of the last things I worked on. Not much, the staff did most of it, of course, but you know, that was one of the last things I was involved with before I left Guernsey. So there was something about opening the creaky doors in my head, and I actually closed the community before the Prime Minister closed the country. I could see what was happening, and we did all sorts of things, you know, and I had all sorts of, not written down anywhere, plans, but, you know, if I felt, if the things were going to be very, very serious, like utility services would start to break down because of the number of deaths and all of that, how would we care for each other here? You know, so I made a little infirmary across the yard and taught some people how to change bed linen with a person in the bed and all of that kind of basic nursing stuff. Yeah.
Yeah, wow, what a story. I also, a friend once told me, you know, it's God's will when you don't really want to do it.
Well, I did try to run. I mean, I did, and all I kept getting in prayer, you know, was trust me, and I'll give you all you need, which of course is very different from all you want. There's a big distinction between the two, and yeah, and I think. I don't think there'll be a warden of Pilsdon who wouldn't say, you know, the role brought me to my knees. You're to be taught to rely on God here is a vital part of understanding what the role is, I think.
And would you mind describing what Pilsdon is for people who don't know?
Pilsdon is almost an entity in its own right. There's a spirit of Pilsdon. It's a religious community. It's a group of people who would not normally find themselves living together. But somehow here we find a way of being together that I hope, and I'm not alone in this, you know, you can't live this life alone, but where everybody's potential can be set free. So people come here and they've been given all sorts of labels by society, by various agencies, by the courts, by the whoever else all. And sure, we take notice of some of that because we have to work out whether we can support people appropriately or not, because we're not a professional therapeutic community. And it would be wrong to invite somebody here that we were unable to support properly. But other than that, the labels disappear. We're not interested in labels. We're interested in who someone is before what they might do, and what they might bring is really important to us. There's a sense of deep mutuality here where we find, you know, I get as cherished, you know. They'll know when I'm tired. And, you know, there's something about it's okay to be me here. And if it's okay for me to be me here, it's more than okay for anybody else who comes to be who they are too. And I think it's probably the most accepting place I have ever encountered in my whole life, really. Wow. Yeah. And once it's grabbed you, Pilsdon, that's it. That's it. Yeah.
And would you mind describing some of the history behind the place? 'Cause it's an amazing physical place as well.
Sure. Well, I mean, it's the most beautiful part of West Dorset. I mean, we're almost we're on the edge of Somerset and on the edge of Devon, so it's very West Dorset. And anybody who knows about Dorset, the landscape is quite different. Lots of hills and lots of twisty lanes. There isn't a motorway in the county. Beautiful hills, lots of agriculture. And so every corner you turn, you find a different view. We live on underneath what's called the Pilsdon Pen, which is the highest point near us, and you can go to the top of the pen and see the sea. And we're on the edge of what's called the Marshwood Vale, and that would have been tree-covered in the Middle Ages for sure. And you can see why the manor house, 17th century manor house, there would have been dwellings before that, but you can see why somebody would have gone to the expense and trouble of building this huge manor house and the yard, this very famous horseshoe yard, because the water's close by. You can see when you get up the Pen who might be coming, and you can see why somebody would want to settle here. Everything you need really is here. And the little parish church, which in terms of parish is now redundant, but it's probably one of the busiest churches in England. We use it, 3 and 4 times a day for our regular prayer. And it was 1958. Percy and Gaynor Smith, he was parish priest at Hawke Church, just over the border into Devon, which though is still in Salisbury Diocese. And he'd been captured by the Little Gidding community, which Nicholas Ferrer started. And he always felt drawn to that. And of course, those of you who know about T.S. Eliot's poem Little Gidding will read some of what he says there, and there's some lovely evocative things in that poem. And Percy had thought about it, and there was lots after the war, there were lots of people who'd been demobbed and had perhaps left orphanages to fight in the Second World War, but found their way back into Civvy Street. Perhaps they'd lost all their families in the Blitz and lost connection. And so there were lots of rootless men, particularly, who went on the road. They became roadmen and they travelled from place to place. And some of them will have found religious communities, of which there were more then, and they would have gone from place to place to work. And so when Pilsdon Manor and its acreage came up for auction in 1958, Percy put a bid in and got it for about £5,600. And when he did, he didn't realise he'd also got a cottage, a thatched cottage, which is Bill's cottage, which is just up the lane from here as well. And so the family moved in. They had other friends who came with them, and they just started to live together. They had a regular pattern of prayer, which still continues to this day, although it's changed over the years. And people just turned up and found their way, and word of mouth, and lots of the men who came, of course, got great skills, and they were able to do. I think there was quite a lot of renovation work needed, but it was really hard going, I think, in those first few years, particularly money. And Percy never asked for money. He let it. He felt that it was through the power of the Holy Spirit. If the community was to be here, then the money would come. And he was very strict. He was a very charismatic guy, and people still talk of him and Gaynor with great affection. Yeah.
So it started off with a bit of a ministry towards wayfarers.
Yeah.
And how did it evolve to what Pilsdon looks like today in terms of who comes to Pilsdon?
Well, of course, in the early days, there were very little in terms of social services as we would know now. And that also meant that there was very little in terms of legal compliances. So lots of things happened. I mean, children were fostered here in Bill's cottage, and all sorts of things happened that probably these days, there'd have to be inspections for and all of those kinds of things. And the level of compliance now that we have to keep is we need to do all these compliances, but for the size of the organisation, it does feel a bit top-heavy sometimes. But I guess we've moved into a place over the years where there's a sense of received wisdom down the years, where Pilsdon knows what it can do and what it can do well, and and to be able to offer that, rather than a kind of scattergun approach that says we'll try and help everybody. And so we're clear, really, and people can come really for any reason, but we do have an assessment process now for their sake and for ours. The only time we do say no to somebody would be if we felt that we couldn't support them appropriately, particularly from a psychiatric point of view. And also people who have had certain offences like arson and offences around children or difficult offences, although we have had some people here on licence from the courts who've had very serious offences, and we've got quite a good reputation with the courts, I think, and that's precious to us. And we've got a good relationship with various agencies, referral agencies, around and about and from quite afar, and priests who know about us, will refer folk to us.
Yeah, and just in being here for a few days, I've glimpsed the diversity of the community in terms of age and ability and people's stories. Would you mind sharing some of the reasons that people come to Pilsdon, and the diversity of the community?
I mean, some people come because they've had a life crisis, perhaps a relationship breakdown, a serious bereavement that's meant they've lost employment, perhaps lost a marriage, something that means there's been a kind of domino effect in their life where they were just about managing perhaps, and then one thing goes wrong and it just all collapses. So there for the grace of God go all of us in that scenario. Nobody, there isn't any of us that can't see ourselves in some of these situations. And then there'll be other people who have issues with addiction. And of course, all of us have issues with addictions and attachments. I know I often feel I want to stand up for people who have addictions. They seem to carry a great load for the rest of us when in fact we've all got patterns that we're attached to and ways of living that could be seen as addictive. And then some people, of course, will come who've perhaps had very serious mental illnesses, but who are now well stabilised on medication. And there are some people who I think are too sane to live in the secular world. They can't manage. They're actually too sane. They're very sensitive to some of the ways in which the secular world relate, live, work in all sorts of compartmentalised ways which are not life-giving, and some people just can't live like that. So all sorts of people come, and what's fascinating is that, once the initial nervousness is over, there's a lot to take on board, lots of people to get to know, names to remember, places to go, where you've got to be at a particular time, the bells ring, what's that bell for? Oh, it's lunch, what's the next bell? And of course it can take a while, and then trust is important, and some people find trusting very, very, very hard indeed. It takes them a long time to trust that what we look as if we're offering is what we're actually offering. Yeah. And we don't see ourselves as a transactional place. So some people come and they're frightened that if they can't do their various jobs or bits of work, that somehow they might be sent away. And it can take a long time for people to realise that's not so here. That if there's a reason, maybe they're not sleeping, or maybe they need their medication changed, or, people can't get, that they're not going to be sent away.
And that's quite different to some of the other communities I've visited, a lot of whom require quite physically well volunteers actually to contribute to the life of the community. And I found it very beautiful to see just such a diversity of people and diversity of ability. And one of the members being, what, late 80s?
Yeah, yes. No, not he's 82, I think.
Okay.
I think 82, yeah. So, yeah.
And some members having been here for, what, 40 years?
Not quite, yeah. One's been here, nearly 40, nearly 40.
Yeah.
So, and all things in between in a way. And the group of people who've made their home here are actually really important. And I'm keen that they should know that. That they're not always sure that that is so, but they hold a very, very important role during transitionary times, particularly of the warden, but also of members who've been here a long time. And so when the warden moves on, that core group of people who've been here a long time, they're very good at being role models about how to live in community, because it's not easy. And they've learned that to live well in community, we have to put the community first. Now, some people, and I think we're all victim to this, there's a part of all of us that would like the community to revolve around us. It's a human failing, isn't it? We want the world to revolve around us. Well, actually, this is the best place to learn how to let go of that. And people who've been here a long time are really, really good. They're good at encouraging new people. They're good at tipping a word to the wise. Just a little bit of a steer here, and that doesn't come from the warden or the members, because that's seen as might be a bit authority. But somebody who's been here a long time would just say, actually, if you do it like this, and they can be very encouraging. And when things, if the cows get loose or the milk separator in the dairy doesn't work, they've got so much experience. Yeah.
And so you've touched upon bells ringing, you've touched upon the active life of the church, you've just talked about cows and a dairy. Would you mind sharing about the rhythms of the day, or what the week looks like at Pilsdon for people?
Pilsdon Day. Well, officially, the day begins, for those who milk the cows, our jerseys, they're hand-milked, begins at 5:45 in the morning. But we have our own cream, obviously. Somebody makes butter, somebody else makes yoghurt. We make paneer here. And so...
Pilsdon paneer has a good ring to it.
Okay, Pilsdon paneer, yeah. So it's lovely. And so that's the sort of early part of the day. And you're very in touch with the seasons when you're up that early. I mean, I don't milk anymore, but I used to. And there's something about settling down on a very short stool and resting your head on a Jersey cow while you milk on a very cold, frosty morning. And you've got the breath of the cow visible, and they're sort of half asleep too sometimes. And then in the spring, of course, you've got the house martins coming back, and they'll do this aerial display around the yard. It's like the Red Arrows, and you'll hear the birds, what I call the conference of the birds in the morning. So it's a lovely beginning. And then you'll see who the early risers are, because they'll be out sitting on the benches, some of the men having a smoke. And a quiet word, and you'll see a very companionable kind of, what kind of a night did you have, and how was it? And all of those little sharings, that build relationships. And I mean, sometimes there's difficulty. People bump into each other occasionally, and people who come first sometimes don't don't perhaps realise that we work hard to live in harmony, but not to deny the inevitable interpersonal difficulties. And how do we learn to live in community with this person? There's lots of space here, which is very useful. And, some people, it takes them a long time sometimes to see a person that really rubs them up the wrong way. And then often the thing that drives you nuts initially about somebody is the thing you come to love about them. And it's just strange, sort of make allowances for people. Yeah.
Yeah, and then after Cal's, there's morning
That's
prayer.
right. So the next bell would be for morning prayer. That goes at about 7:25 in the week. Later on Sundays. And that's half an hour, that's set aside. And whoever's leading will choose what they want to offer. Although there's some pretty sort of regular patterns to that. So it's not chop and changing all the time. So we value each other's gifts when it comes to that. But we are more and more a contemplative way in our prayer, because we're so busy during the rest of the day. It's really nice to have that balance and much less words, I think, than used to be here. And I think people now that's harmonised with some of the people who come to be with us here, who, and of course, in various courses and agencies will teach mindfulness and all of that. And so there are quite a lot of people now who will come particularly to our evening meditation, and they will share with us when we're sitting. And so it's nice, more people come for that. And then the next bell would be the breakfast bell, and somebody will get that. We have some cooked breakfast during the week, and we have a very nice cooked breakfast on a Saturday. A good old-fashioned English breakfast. I forgot the coffee bell, that goes at 11. And midday prayer, of course, the bell will go at 20 to 1. And there are a couple of Eucharists in the week at midday too, so that happens. And then later on in the day, 4:30, there'll be a bell for tea and toast. And when there's a birthday, that's when we celebrate birthdays. There'll be a big cake for somebody's birthday. And then evening prayer, evening meditation, or on a Sunday, it'll be the main service of the day. It'll be a Eucharist on a Sunday evening. And supper at 7 most nights. And then the bell will go for night prayer for Compline. And that's said in the house chapel.
And then there's work which goes on in between all of these things.
Yes, it just shows the priorities I've got, isn't it? Yeah, so work happens. Yeah, I mean, obviously, there's all sorts of things that go on, and members organise group tasks, and various people. I'm responsible for the kind of jobs that have to be done. So laying of tables, washing up after breakfast, laying up supper, doing tea and toast in the afternoon, and everybody does something. And it's important that they do. It's important that if somebody forgets to do something and people turn up for tea and toast and it's not happened, there's a whole lot of people all wandering around what's happened to the tea and toast. So everybody gets a bit of responsibility, in doing some of the jobs. Yeah. And big vegetable garden, of course, and flower garden and housekeeping things, cleaning, although we're not crazy about cleaning. We do get it done.
Animals as well.
And the animals, of course, we've got the cows, they've got their calves, we've got sheep, and more often than not we've got pigs and our own hens, of which we've just got a new batch today. So one of the members takes responsibility for the animals. And we've got good relationships with our vet and everything else. and the land too, and that needs to be looked after carefully because we haven't got huge amounts of pasture. And so rotation of the land is important so that we don't get worm and things like that, which will affect the animals. Sometimes overused land can be a problem. Yeah.
And in terms of the makeup of the community, so you're warden and have kind of overarching responsibility for the place. And then you've also made reference to members.
Yeah.
And then other people referred to as
guests, really. It's a really old-fashioned term. And like warden is in some senses, and we've debated whether or not people who come to share our life are, I always introduce them as members of the community because that's what they are. But in terms of our paperwork, we use the word guest. I guess because it offers this hospitality. Word guest is important, isn't it? So it's offering of hospitality. So I'm a warden and an Anglican priest, and the warden has always been an Anglican priest because we're a religious community, and the trustees this time have affirmed again that the warden of the community, the leader of the community, would actually be an ordained priest because of the nature of our life. And members come from all sorts of different backgrounds and find their way here by word of mouth usually. And they take a share of the leadership role, and I guess each warden has their own way of leading. My way is that as much and as far as possible it's consensus led. Just occasionally, very rarely, a warden and I've had to do it, so well, okay, on balance I think I'm going to have to decide this, but that's pretty rare. I mean, usually we and I suppose one of the things about being a member here is you don't come as if you're coming to a job, and warden, you're coming to a life, and you're not coming to a job role. First and foremost, you're a member, and some people find that very hard because they're used to having a very well defined role, and the role of member is actually quite hard to define in a way. But we work together to organise the day, the week, the year, and we listen a lot to each other about how people are, and we build. It's necessary that we build very trusting relationships with each other, because then the safety of everybody else here is more. It's there. There's a holding. There's a holding, and without that depth of trust, the holding isn't quite so secure. So, yeah, we listen a lot to each other.
Yeah, so there are 3 members?
There are 4 at the moment. I mean, Liselle is just coming to the end of her kind of probationary period, really, and so she's going to be a member. So there's me, there's Mary, James and Liselle, and we're expecting Nigel and Mary this coming weekend. So we'll be 6, having been 3 for too long.
And are members also ordained, or?
No, it's not a requirement, but and they can be. So Liselle is a priest, and so is Nigel. But I've been alone as a priest since 2019 until March this year, really.
And I'm also interested in terms of practically and financially how communities are able to function. So how is it that Pilsdon works kind of financially in terms of members are paid to be here? Do guests have to pay to be here, or is it on fundraising or donations?
Well, it's a whole mixture of things, really. The funding that funds our kind of general revenue comes from housing benefit usually, or people who have private means, and a top up from their personal benefit, and together that helps the general revenue, if you like, side of the community. However, if we have an enormously generous group of donors who give regularly, and we've been given bequests over years, and so at this moment in time the community is financially sound. It hasn't always been so, but we are at the moment. The generosity of our donors is just extraordinary, and we would not manage without them. Certainly, I think everybody here is subsidised probably to about £45 to £50 a week, which means that we can offer things here that people wouldn't be able to access if they were living in a flat on their own. So lots of different things to learn, lots of different kinds of jobs here. I mean, most people who come here would never have dreamt that they'd ever hand milk a cow, you know, or make butter, make bread or whatever. Yeah. So the donors come, and then when there's a building project or something like that, we've been very well supported by the Heritage Lottery Fund. There's a building charity called Crash, and they have just been, just astonishing in their help to us. They've been amazing. So all this side of the yard, was all helped by them, really. They're just an amazing charity. You don't hear about them much, and I think the name Crash is an interesting name, isn't it? But they've been very, very generous. And for somebody like me, when our reservoir collapsed in week before Christmas 2021, fortunately we're on mains water now. We didn't used to be. I rang up immediately in the new year and said, can you find me somebody to help us, work out what it is we need to do with this? They called it a reservoir. Actually, what it was a Victorian red brick built holding tank, and the front wall fell away. So that was a bit of a shock. But anyway, Crash came up with the right people and right advice. I wouldn't have known where to have started, really. So.
And you've mentioned members having kind of a probation period and it being a role in some case. So they are employed by...
Technically, so that we can do PAYE, so that there can be pension payments made, they are technically employed, but it is at the very most minimal, so that we're legally compliant in a way. But it's not. It's a joke. It's not a living wage. However, everything is all found here. And so the community only employs one person, and that's our operations manager, Jane, who saves my sanity. She started off as office coordinator, but it was obvious that there needed to be somebody who would keep track of projects so that things that got started got finished. Because when members and wardens are busy, if there's a bit of a hullabaloo, things can be forgotten. So that was one of the strategic things that I've done as warden, was to change her role, and she had the capacity to do it. She does it well. So now she will negotiate contracts. She will ask people for quotes when work's needing to be done. All in consultation with me. We work very closely together. We draw up the budget together. We've got a very good treasurer who's got lots of charity experience. He's very supportive, and we are very supported by our trustees. They've got a big heart for Pilsdon, and they go way over and above what's really expected of a trustee in a whole host of ways, including lots of practical things too. They're great. Yeah.
Yeah. And what have been some of the greatest blessings and challenges of your time at Pilsdon?
Just well, the biggest blessing for me personally is just the privilege of being here. That's it. They're beautiful. Challenges. Well, the collapsing reservoir was fairly challenging. COVID was fairly challenging, although there were lots of blessings in that. We were isolated in the sense we fell between all the stools, so we didn't get any help really from any of the statutory agencies. We couldn't sort of like an old people's home, or we were isolated in that sense. But one of the blessings of that was that we could live as one household. We could eat together, and we got to know each other a lot better. And that certainly first lockdown, when the weather was so beautiful, it was a wonderful. In some ways, although the world seemed to be going to hell in a handcart, we had to remember that. We did have to remember that. I think one of the most important was that first Easter, where any other parish, any other church, you couldn't go in the church, never mind celebrate Easter. And of course, we, like other religious communities, probably were the only people who could. So I was very aware as we took the Paschal candle back into the church, having lit the fire, that we were bringing a whole host of people with us who couldn't gather on that Easter Sunday. That was deeply moving. It was a real reminder of what was happening in the world. And we tried hard really to make sure that people who are part of our extended communities, so we upped the number of newsletters that we were sending out, and that takes quite a lot of hard work. We have a small leadership team, and so we rang people up. How are you? Before I closed the community, I rang one or two people up and said, who I knew were alone. I could see what was going to happen, and I said, if you want to come and be with us through this, come. Yeah. And so we gave them an opportunity to decide that. We brought some people back and put them through quarantine so that they could rejoin the community, people who were isolated, and that worked really well. Yeah.
So got two final questions. So there is a book about Pilsdon if people want to read more about Pilsdon.
There is, yeah. Living Life in Common, it's called.
But we also talked about how there's an essence to Pilsdon which is hard to communicate in a book. So how would you choose to communicate the essence of Pilsdon in just a paragraph or a minute?
I think it's an expression of the dynamic of the Holy Trinity. It's about relationship with each other, with God, with the land, with the animals, with the whole world in a sense. We're a microcosm of something here. It's very, very hard, I think, to put words to it. And there's something about having to be careful about that. It's, trying to define it too closely, it ends up becoming almost a dissection of a butterfly, and I guess, the experience of being here. And when we meet people who have been part of the community, although not our generation of community, there's a sense that you know each other. There's a sense that you have a connection. You've never met this person before, but they've lived in this community before, and you don't have to say it, you just get it. And there's an immediate kind of rapport that says, oh gosh, have you been through some difficult times? And so did you. And this is what we learned. And this is how we learned to trust God, how we learned to trust each other, how we learn to let go. And, you know, somebody said to me, I don't know how you do this job. I said, well, I try hard not to do it. I said, I try to keep out of God's way as much as possible, and to sit lightly to it. And the minute I try to over control, I can feel it going, slipping. Something slips.
You speak so beautifully.
Well, I sometimes feel I'm given to say rather than anything else.
Yeah, it's a beautiful community. Yeah. Yeah, and I think community is so powerful in creating spaces of belonging. It's what I really experienced in the community that I was a part of in Cambridge, is that real sense of belonging for people who often are rejected otherwise by mainstream society. And the beauty of that, and seeing
belonging
people
is just so important, isn't it?
Yeah.
Belonging is, and there's a lovely quote that's on the bookmark that we put in the book when we're selling them to people, and it's about you can't force love onto the mind. It has to sing its way into the heart. I haven't remembered it properly, but it's a lovely quote. That was Percy. Mary is our historian, of course, and she did the history project, which I didn't talk about, but that's where the book came from. And there's some lovely quotes from Percy, particularly in the early days, and how he was trying to express his vision, and how he realised, you know, he was just as frail as everybody else, and that's a big wake up for all of us, isn't it?
Yeah. And I've named this podcast Dwelling Place after Psalm 84, and I've been asking people, where is it that they found God dwelling in their life and community?
Well, it's everywhere now. It's in the light of somebody's eye. It's the way in which somebody will just help somebody, offer a kindness, offer a forgiveness, own a new insight, integrate a new learning, will take a risk to do something they haven't done before. It's everywhere. There's nowhere it's not. God is here in this place.
Oh, thank you so much, Sue.
Thank you.
Show me your lovely dwelling